And welcome to the European Parliament in Brussels for this new edition of Talking Europe. Same-sex marriage will not happen in Croatia. Earlier this month, two-thirds of Croatian voters backed a proposal to constitutionally define marriage as between heterosexuals. The result of this referendum in this Catholic and conservative country shows the issue of homosexuality continues to polarize a number of EU member states. Is Croatia a one-off, or is Europe swinging in that direction? I will put the question to my guests right now. Christofer FJELLNER, welcome to Talking Europe. You're a Swedish MEP from the centre-right European People's Party. You've been very active in promoting gay rights in your native Sweden, but also across Europe. I know there's a little problem with the throat today. Thank you very much, though, for having agreed to stay on our set. Also on this set, Ryszard Legutko. Welcome to Talking Europe. You're from Poland, from the European Conservatives and Reformists group. At home, you belong to the Law and Justice Party. You served as Education Minister in the government of Jarosław Kaczynski, known for his conservative views on family and marriage. Welcome to Talking Europe. Christofer FJELLNER, you've been a member of the European Parliament for 10 years. How has the situation changed over the past decade for gay people in Europe?
I think it's very hard to speak about one Europe and one perspective, because I think it differs a lot between different member states. But in general, I would say the trend is towards a more open attitude towards gay people all over Europe. But there are from time to time setbacks in different member states. But the overall trend, not just during the last 10 years, the last 20, the last 30 years, is more acceptance and openness, which I of course think is good.
What about Poland, a traditionally Catholic country? Has the situation for gay people changed since you joined in 2004?
Well, first of all, I object to this labeling with which you started. Here is a man who represents sort of left-wing or progressive, and here is another man who represents conservative views on the family and marriage. My God, what's so conservative about the view that a marriage is a union of man and woman? I mean, this has been an institution with us from time immemorial. What we have been witnessing in Europe is a radical revolution over the last 20 years, perhaps, 10 years. I mean, this is, I believe, a very radical, unnecessary, and on the long run extremely destructive experiment, which we'll be regretting very soon. So I would say that I represent, well, tradition, if you will, a common sense. I represent what the
I guess you want
what
to
the Western culture has stood for,
react
and
to that.
still is.
No, yeah. It's always hard with labeling. I would never label myself as left-wing in any way. Normally back in Sweden people think that I'm pretty far to the right, but in this aspect, of course, it is something that's not only a question about Europe and Europe values. It's a global phenomena of tolerance and openness, and then of course, as all societal changes, there are those that actually want to. My father told me when I was younger that don't stand in the way of things to come, you'll only be run over. That is of course a pretty tough position. And I can understand if one feels frustration if that happens. But honestly, I think that in times to come, people will laugh at this discussion and say that, you know, love, no matter if it's between a man and a woman, or two women or two men, the concept is love, and that's the important part.
The concept is absurd. I mean, of course, if you have what we have today is the dictatorship of the majority. If you have the majority, you can legislate anything. So.
Although gay people would argue that they're not in a majority.
Well, that's not quite as simple as that. Because first, I'm not quite sure what you mean about talking about gay people. Well, what I know, you probably will be talking about homosexual activists or homosexual groups that have been very active and have hijacked the mainstream. This is a usurpation. I mean, this is not true that the homosexual activists represent
Does a majority of Poles agree with your positions?
Yes, I would say the majority. I would say the majority of people generally believe that this is a stupid experiment.
It almost sounds like a conspiracy theory that there's this.
I never said anything of that.
No, but it almost sounds like that.
Has nothing to do with conspiracy.
If there should be some gay activist minority that imposes something on the majority. The fact is that, I don't know, in Sweden we've had a huge discussion and debate in public life about, I know in France as well, about these issues for decades. And I know that in Poland there was also this discussion. And values change. New generations comes with different values than the rest. And I'm actually pretty happy for a lot of the changes that we've had up until now. Because if we weren't up where we are right now, on a lot of issues, like the unification of Europe, we wouldn't be sitting here. We'd probably be fighting each other instead. So the change of values is probably something good.
Just a few figures, though. When you look at the European Union, 8 countries have legalized same-sex marriage. It includes France and Britain. In Britain, it was done by a conservative prime minister. What is so wrong if a majority of MPs in Britain, in France and in a number of EU countries believe that this is the way forward? What is so wrong about it?
Because this is not marriage. I mean, let me say, if you have the majority in the parliament, you can legislate anything. I mean, that's my point. There are certain institutions that just you do not tamper with. When I had this under communism, you had it in the Bolshevik Revolution, you had it in the French Revolution. Family is the first object of attack during the revolution. And about what you said, that we shouldn't be in the way of progress. Well, I was living for 2/3 of my life under the system, and the authorities were telling me you shouldn't stay in the way of progress. And I did, and I won. And I'm very thankful to the Providence or whoever that I wasn't stupefied by the prevailing ideology. And that's my duty as an intellectual and as a politician, not to follow with the current.
Okay.
No, exactly. And I must say that I'm very both thankful and impressed by all those people that stood up against communism and the majority opinion. But I think that it's important today to look at where the majority is in a lot of countries. I actually took part in a gay pride parades in Warsaw just to show my solidarity to those people that actually dared to stand up against those people that don't think they should have the right of freedom of assembly and walk the streets. So in a sense, I think that might be that those activists that you criticize are the people that actually take on your cause and brings it into the next century.
I mean, it's like the feminists hijack the cause of women. I mean, feminist is an ideology. Okay, there are women who are feminists, but there are millions of women who hate feminists. And there are millions of people of homosexual inclination who despised homosexualism as ideology.
Okay, well, that's your reading. Now, we completely understand that you are against same-sex marriage. That's absolutely clear. Let's talk about the rise of homophobia in a number of countries, because I would like to ask you whether the current crisis and the rise of far-right parties across Europe can or will be a threat to homosexuals in Europe.
Honestly, I think it's a little bit too simplified to say that the far right is either against or in favor of these. I would like take the Dutch. I don't absolutely despise a lot of the positions of the Dutch far right, but it's hard to say that they're homophobic, so to say, that there's a little bit more of a complicated picture. But in general, I think it's a trend that might hamper the movement towards more tolerance for homosexuals, but it's a little bit too simplified.
As you said, there are several types of far-right parties.
Exactly.
In the Netherlands, you have a very different situation than, let's say...
But the general trend, I would agree with that.
In France or Hungary. Mr. Legutko, what about Poland?
Homophobia, which you mentioned, is a stick with which you beat the people who dare to raise any kind of criticism,
well, it means attacks against people who openly say they are gay. It's a very concrete concept, but it happens in Europe.
No, of course not. I mean, it means...
So homophobia does not exist in Europe?
It may mean anything, you see. It's those, well, people like yourselves, with all due respect, anything can be considered homophobic, which is
Let's
not
call it an
liked
attacks
by-
against people because of their sexual orientation, if you prefer that wording. Do you see a rise in these attacks as a result of the crisis?
I mean, this is a totally fictitious problem, which you brought up, gentlemen. It doesn't exist anywhere, at least anywhere in Europe or in the States. Homosexuals are, I would say, the sacred cows. They are dictating the laws, they're changing the legislation.
Okay,
Come on.
Regarding homophobia.
I've met, unfortunately, a lot of people that has actually been attacked physically and beaten up for their sexuality, and for them it was not fictive, it was painful. But I think it is a little bit scary, because I think part of this discussion, and when I listen to you, is a mirror of a discussion I've had with a lot of people that don't want immigration, for example. They say that racism and attacks on people from other parts of the world so I think, unfortunately, you're kind of using an argument that sides with the wrong people. But I would say, on the question that you asked, that I think that we have a trend in Europe against more tolerance. The crisis might be a minor setback, but I think the general trend actually talks in favor of tolerance.
What we have here, I would think, is not a homophobia, but rather, for instance, Christophobia. Look at what happened to the Archbishop of Brussels, who was brutally attacked by pro-abortion lesbians recently at the University of Brussels. Christians are the group that has been discriminated against for the last decades, not the homosexuals. No, I mean, they are the most protected group you can have in Europe, by law, by courts, by politicians, by media.
Even in your country, Poland?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Well, earlier this month, 2/3 of Croatian voters backed a proposal to constitutionally define marriage as between heterosexuals, as I mentioned earlier in the program. Let's watch our report.
Celebrating a result that constitutionally bans gay marriage. After collecting more than 700,000 signatures to bring about the referendum, the group In the Name of the Family got what they wanted.
We will prevent any government, any political elite from changing this substance of marriage without taking advice, without consulting citizens of Croatia.
Nearly 2/3 of Croatian voters said yes to the question, do you agree that marriage is matrimony between a man and a woman? In a predominantly Catholic country, the result comes as no surprise.
I really don't have anything against homosexuals. I've many friends who are homosexuals. But as a mother, I think that for a child's emotional and psychological development, it's really important to have a mother and a father.
Liberal Prime Minister Zoran Milanovic called it, quote, sad and pointless, and has promised to give gay couples more rights in the future. Meanwhile, opponents say the referendum could lead to further discrimination.
Tomorrow it will be the turn of cyclists and those who walk their dogs, and then the Jews, and we know how that will end. I think this is fascism entering through a small door.
Attitudes towards homosexuals had slowly been improving in Croatia. Pride marches are staged regularly, albeit under heavy security, while gay couples can also register their unions.
Well, it's time now to welcome on this set our new partner in the show. Joining me is Tim King, the editor of European Voice, publisher of a weekly newspaper on EU news. Tim, welcome to Talking Europe. As we heard, there is a divide between the north, the south, the east, the west, but there's something we have to say. Family, all these issues, all these social issues aren't actually decided at EU level.
No, and perhaps that's just as well, because the kind of disagreements that you've have across this table are reproduced across the European Union, and in some places less civilized than the discussion that you've been having. And the fascinating thing for me is how badly the EU is equipped to deal with these social issues. A few weeks ago we were looking at the European Citizens' Initiative. which is a form of glorified petition that has been introduced by the Lisbon Treaty. And the first 3 of these European Citizens Initiative, the most advanced, they have to get at least 1 million signatures from 7 countries or some tests like this. And you look at the first 3 and they're just socially divisive issues that the European Commission, which is supposed to respond in some way to these positions, cannot possibly come up with legislation to respond to. It's about privatisation, liberalisation of water. It's about abortion and right to life issues. And there's GMOs, genetically modified organisms. What is the European Union supposed to do?
And Europe has no hard power in these issues. It has soft power, though. As you said, you yourself took part in a gay parade in Warsaw. This is how MEPs are using their soft power.
So, but I must say, some MEPs would like to have, and some politicians would like to give the EU hard power in legislation. I actually am not one of them, because I think that you can't really impose changes of values to other countries, and I don't think that's the idea of the European Union. But I would like to try to use my platform as member of the European Parliament to contribute to the debate and to try to change perspectives and values. So I think that it would be bad to try to give the European Union hard power, but eventually, through the fact that we meet each other, we travel, we work in different places, this is a melting pot, and that we will have more of European perspective on it, but it doesn't, you can't change that with a petition.
So, Mr. Legutko, is it impossible to reconcile all these different views at the EU level? What is your feeling?
There is no an attempt to reconcile these views. As I was saying, since several decades there has been a tremendous push to the left of the political mainstream in Europe. They are imposing moral legislation on the rest of Europe, and probably the ideal would be to have a country, with all due respect, like Sweden, which has been called the Saudi Arabia of political correctness, and that I'm very much afraid.
And the fascinating thing is that Swedes tend to like that.
Well, we'll have to leave it there as we're running out of time thinking. Christofer FJELLNER, Ryszard, Legutko, thank you very much for taking part in this edition of Talking Europe. Now, please stay with me. I'll return just after the news break.